We shall fight with growing confidence and with growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Upon this battle depends the future of all civilization. Upon it depends our own British life, all that Britain is and all that Britain means. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all of Europe may be free, and the world can move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years. Men will still say this was their finest hour. Advance Britannia, long live the cause of freedom, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Three cheers for Mr. Winston Churchill. Hip hip.
Hooray!
Hip hip.
Hooray!
Hip hip.
Hooray!
Thank
So, gentlemen, the plan is Normandy. Yes, of course, Calais is a convenient stone's throw away, and has a decent port too. We all know Calais is the obvious choice, including the Germans.
So what's special about Normandy then?
It's no secret that Romeau's Atlantic wall is nigh on impregnable around Calais. But further south, and the fortifications are nowhere near up to strength.
And this plan, it has the blessing of Allied High Command, does it?
In principle, although when we presented an outline, they insisted that we scale up the whole show. More men, more aircraft, more ships, more landing craft. But while you're at it, keep it simple, Monty insisted. You know Monty. Normandy was selected for very specific reasons. Normandy remains close enough to allow our aircraft to protect the troops as they land on the beaches. The beaches are wide and shallow, perfect terrain for the massive armada of landing craft, and long enough for a front so broad the enemy will not be able to contain the weight of our onslaught.
How do we know all this?
Believe it or not, we owe a debt of gratitude to the British public. Following a radio pill by the BBC in '42, 10 million postcards and photos of pre-war holidays on the continent were sent in. Combined with RAF aerial reconnaissance, we've been able to build up an intimate and detailed picture of Europe's entire northern coastline. So, gentlemen, here, in a nutshell, is how we are going to do it. Force. Force on an unprecedented scale. A combination of ships, aircraft and men from 13 allied countries. Minesweepers will clear the way for almost 7,000 ships and landing craft to leave their south coast ports, converge here, and then proceed across the channel towards Normandy. Meanwhile, aircraft will begin bombing the enemy's vital defences, as well as railways, bridges, and communications. Our friends in the resistance will be joining in. Early the following day, paratroopers will drop behind enemy lines to protect both ends of the landings from enemy counter-attack. Then the Navy will begin one of the biggest bombardments in history, ready for the most ambitious amphibious landing ever staged. Finally, in staggered landings across a 50-mile front, 130,000 troops will hit Normandy's beaches with the objective of securing every one. Ready to move inland and reached the Seine in 90 days.
And this drawing in one of the books by one of those people involved demonstrates exactly how the marshalling was going to work. All of these units have to come from far inland and then head down to the coast. But in order to prepare them, they need to go through different phases. So initially, from the inland camps, these units will journey towards the coast, where they will arrive at what were called marshalling camps. Here, they would be separated into their fighting formations. This is their last chance to organise themselves as fighting units as they intended to land on the beach. And then, after that, they will make their way right to the coast to their individual points of embarkation. This is where they will get onto their landing craft and then make their way out to sea. Now, the important thing is, all of this has to be done in an incredibly short time, because you cannot keep 132,700 men on their vessels for too long. There isn't space, there aren't facilities, they can't feed them, there's no room for exercise. If you leave them on their vessel for more than a week, they're going to become lethargic and ill and seasick, and when you drop them off in France, they are not going to be in any condition to fight. So the embarkation has to be incredibly efficient, and it has to be incredibly quick. As we get to the end of May, on the 25th of May at 11:30 p.m, Admiral Ramsay issued the instruction that Operation Neptune was to be carried out. And that night, 30 minutes later, all of the marshalling camps of all of the troops inside were sealed. Then at 10 a.m. on the 31st of May, the tanks roll out of Petworth and begin their journey to the marshalling area. Now, that journey must inevitably, is this plan? Yes, have gone down the A272 along the South Downs, taking them along this reasonably well-built road through the town of Midhurst, which is now, of course, the headquarters of the South Downs National Park Authority, and then over into the direction of Petersfield. Are you there yet? Not quite. Yeah, getting there. Now this is entirely supposition on my part, because I have no documentation or photographs to prove this. However, it is the only way that they could have gone in this direction. And I know that they must have gone to Petersfield, and I know that they must have gone onto the A3, because the next thing that we see, is a photograph that was taken by James Macklem of them just south of Queen Elizabeth Country Park. Now their journey is going to take them down the A3 along the route of the present dual carriageway. During the 1940s, that dual carriageway wasn't there, it was just a single road, but the route is fairly unchanged. Had they gone right, and followed that blue road to the left in the direction of Denmead, I think, then they would have encountered some rather interesting things. That blue line indicates that that's a one-way road. So it's closed to traffic coming in the other direction. But that road needed to be improved by the War Office before tanks could use it. And in fact, in 1943, at a cost of £7,520, that road was widened to accommodate military convoys. And if you drive along that road today, you will see rather interesting remains of that money being spent. You will see these lay-bys on the side of the road. In fact, there's several of them as you journey along. Just for a 2-mile distance, there's all of these concrete lay-bys on the side. What are they there for? They're not necessary on a road like that. There's not that many places people want to pull in and answer their phone, and there's not that many gateways either. And in fact, these are 1943 lay-bys put in place in case vehicles on convoys such as these heading to their marshalling areas were to break down. And the War Office, in their infinite wisdom, had even issued specifications for these sorts of lay-bys, giving exact widths that they need to be to accommodate the largest tanks. And these were built in their thousands all over the south coast. And the present A3 runs immediately alongside this road, but this road still survives, connecting the various settlements. And they pass into, Hornby. Now this is where they start to see all of the other military convoys arriving. And at Hornby, they will have passed scenes like this on the sides of the roads. Huge numbers of columns of tanks and trucks, all parked up outside various marshalling camps. Now, the parking of vehicles on the side of the road had been a problem for the local councils right from the start of the war. Suddenly, the army are moving around in vast quantities, and they're parking on verges and causing significant erosion. And they even complained about it in one of their missives and said that this needs to stop. If they carry on doing this, they will damage the edges of the roads and it will become incredibly inconvenient. So before D-Day, the military then decided, okay, we need dedicated widened roads in order to park convoys. And on these maps that you'll see around the festival, these administrative maps, all of these black lines that you see on various locations all indicate huge lengths of surfaced land where convoys can pull up, making their way to their ultimate destination on the 31st, which is their marshalling camp. And that takes them down through Waterlooville, and the war diary simply says that they arrived at their camp in Waterlooville for the night. Now that camp is roughly now where the A3M is, which is that there? Yes. So right now the A3M goes straight through the middle of this camp, which was on Stakes Hill Estate. But in the 1940s, that motorway wasn't there. So you have this lovely estate with a nice country house and lots of grounds, including woodland around it. Now in 1944, that had been transformed into a military camp. And if we look at it in more detail, can you see just to the top and towards the bottom, where I've circled it in red, lots and lots of black dots? Those are tents to accommodate the men who will be staying in this camp. And this is as it's depicted in some of the administrative maps and documents that show the tented accommodation around the centre of the camp. Now this tented accommodation was necessary because they couldn't build enough buildings to accommodate all of these men. And Sergeant Desmond O'Neill even captured some of this in film. Here we see, I can't quite see the screen, but yes, here we go. So a mother brings her little girl along, and then this officer decides to show her how to use a revolver, because that's an obvious thing to do. And then this man says, can you help me fix my tank so that I don't have to do it, so he can go back to the bar. So these are brilliant scenes, and I spent a lot of time wondering where they had been filmed. And by working out from the war diary where this unit had probably been positioned, and then looking at the local roads on Google Street View for far more time than I actually had available to me, I started to work out where it actually was. And using this photograph taken by Mapham, I was then able to piece together the exact location. There we go. And this is a place called Hulbert Road in Havant. And there is the exact scene to this day. The houses down the side are still the same. And of course, as soon as I worked that out, I then discovered that if you Google Hulbert Road and D-Day embarkation, because it's just down there, the bottom left of the screen, about a mile away from their marshalling camp, I then discovered that 10 years ago somebody else had done all of this already and worked out not only the location, but also they'd managed to identify the little girl who played with the revolver, and that is her genital bottom. Now I think, though, they got the name of the soldier wrong, because they said he was somebody Fisher, Trooper Jock Fisher, that was it. But I don't think so. A friend of mine, Robert Glennie, pointed out that he looks the spitting image of Sergeant Stanley Diver, who was one of the tank commanders. And he is, because Mapham took several photos of Sergeant Diver, who tragically was killed on the 19th of January 1945. But I think that's who that soldier is, who was trying to teach the young girl how to use a revolver. Start driving through Cosham on their way to Gosport. Now, as they make their way through Cosham, they encounter, as you might expect, and is inevitably going to happen, a bit of a traffic jam. And that traffic jam is a mix of different military vehicles. You might recognise the Duck on the left, or DUKW, there's one of those just up there a little bit earlier, and the tanks of the 13th, 18th Hussars. Again, I spent far too long trying to work out where this photograph was taken, which was very difficult because none of those houses survive. This is the scene in Cosham today. For those of you who know it, it's very close to the Tesco's, and then the bridge under the M27. The only clue, in fact, was that pub on the left, which you can just make out is in fact still there today. That is the only building that survives. Not visible from the original viewpoint, but very much still there. Quite a distinctive roof it has. After clearing that traffic jam, the 13th, 18th Hussars then carried on their journey from Cosham over to, what's the next? Porchester, thank you very much. And then on their way to Gosport. And there's another photograph And this one I did work out myself, somebody else hadn't already done it before I had. This isn't the 13th, 18th Hussars, but it does show the road that they were taking as they made their way from Porchester over towards Gosport. And it is this photograph that I used in my title slide. Again, the only real clue is in the houses that are actually around there, and you can just make out in the background another very distinctive house just at the back with a very particular, and viewed from this angle, a very particular roof. And there it is to this day, it is still there. Making their way past numerous places, the red lines all indicate column parking places, so huge convoys of tanks and trucks are going to be lined up all along those. They make their way down towards the waterfront, right to the very centre of Gosport, and out next to a little place by the ferry terminal. And this is where they are going to get onto their landing craft to make their journey across the English Channel. Here they park up at the side of the road amongst bomb-damaged houses on South Street, ready to embark on their landing craft. In order to achieve this, though, they need a rather special facility, and it is visible in this photograph taken just after the war, and I've highlighted in red the exact bit we're looking at. That is the embarkation hard, where they are going to be getting on to their vessels. Now, the reason for this embarkation hard being there is because landing craft are very particular in design. They are designed to be driven off using the bow ramp, so that they can pull up at a beach and you can drive straight onto it. And that is, of course, exactly what happened on D-Day and in Exercise Fabius just before it. Dear Webster of the Royal Engineers, and he proposed prefabricated concrete blocks that could be made off-site and taken into the intertidal area at low tide and laid across your beach. So these are pre-prepared concrete blocks. They've had time to cure in the factories they're being made in, and they're then just laid en masse. The trials for this concrete block, or beach hardening mat as officially christened, were held in Stokes Bay in Gosport, where the War Office drove a variety of different vehicles across them to see how well they withstood the weight of tanks and trucks. They even drove a motorcycle over it, completely pointlessly if you ask me, because it's a lot lighter. But they found that they took the weight of these vehicles very, very well. And so after refining the design a little bit, they started mass producing these beach hardening mats in vast, vast numbers. And they're specially designed so they could all be attached to one another using steel beams or hawsers that passed through the middle of them so they could be hooked onto one another. And you can see in this film footage just how hard wearing they are when the man with the narrative is any second now. And you'll also get an idea as to how they acquired the nickname chocolate blocks very, very quickly. So, these beach hardening mats then are laid in your intertidal area. The final thing left to do is to build a pier, which is usually constructed using timbered dolphins, as they're called, the upstanding bits, connected together with scaffolding so you have a walkway and you can get up onto the sides of the landing craft. With the pier, the intertidal chocolate blocks, you can see the sheer quantity of them laid there, and the concrete apron at the top. This is your concrete beach to facilitate loading your landing craft as quickly as possible. Pier sticking out just there. A phenomenal building effort that doesn't always, sadly, leave any physical evidence today, because over by the ferry terminal in Gosport, that area has been radically redeveloped, and any trace above the high water mark, above the low water mark, in fact, has been entirely removed. But there are other places you can see the physical evidence of this. If you go a little bit further around the coast from Gosport Ferry, you get to Stokes Bay, where the War Office and the Admiralty built 4 of these along Stokes Bay itself. And Stokes Bay hasn't actually changed that much overall. Over 50% of the points where troops got onto their vessels for D-Day were these specially constructed facilities that had only been constructed 2 years or 1 year earlier. This is in fact the 13th, 18th Hussars embarking at the ferry terminal, again photographed by Sergeant James Mappin, and he took numerous photographs of them getting onto their landing craft. But he also noted that they were getting on in a very particular order. He and Brigadier Prior Palmer, the commander of the 27th Armoured Brigade, watched them loading onto their landing craft. The musical background is great, isn't it? So, watching the men get on, the two officers then saw them as they set sail into into the Solent rather, and over to their fleet anchorage, which in fact was just outside Portsmouth Harbour, just to the right of Fort Gilkicker, in that area that I've highlighted in green between Spitbank Fort and Gilkicker Fort on the Gosport coast. Now, in fact, some of the landing craft then had to go back the next day, later that afternoon, because they realised that several of the landing craft tank were dangerously overloaded. So they whistled up an extra landing craft from the flotilla of landing craft, that's 41st LCT flotilla, under Lieutenant Commander Pucher, and one landing craft was added to this formation under the command of Sub-Lieutenant Charles Flynn to make their assault on Normandy on the 5th of June. Little did they know that at the exact time that they were loading, the powers that be were meeting at Southwark House and discussing the forthcoming weather forecast. And it was pointed out by, I forget his rank, Stagg of the Air Force, the weather master, I think he's Group Captain. Group Captain? Yes, thank you. Group Captain Stagg was pointing out that the weather system that was coming in off the Atlantic was going to be extremely hazardous, and suggested that D-Day should be delayed by a short period in order to make it safe for them to land. And Eisenhower decided that indeed, yes, they would have to delay and postpone possibly until the 6th of June. So the men on their landing craft sit and wait. They had expected to be on their landing craft for 24 hours before they set sail on the morning of the 4th of June. They then find themselves trapped on their landing craft for an additional day, 48 hours, stuck on this landing craft. Now, for those of you who have been to LCT 7074 outside the D-Day story, I know every inch of that vessel because I was lucky enough to be the archaeologist and heritage advisor during its restoration. So I know that there is absolutely zero space for the men who'd be embarked on the vessel. Most of them sleep underneath their tanks because there is no accommodation. The east end of the Solent, at a place called Spithead, and turn right and start making their way towards the Normandy coast. And early on the morning of the 6th of June, Sergeant Desmond O'Neill captures them as they prepare themselves on his landing craft LCT 610, ready to make their landing on Sword Beach. Slowly, the landing crafts, I can't see it, the landing crafts start to approach the beach as the darkness of the night starts to lift. So at about 6 a.m. they're making their way towards the beach. They're about 10 miles away at this stage. They are in Group 7, so they will be landing 40 minutes after the assault waves. The assault waves go in at 7:25. This unit, the follow-up squadron of the tanks then, is going in at 10 past 8 in the morning. And they arrive just off the beaches, perfectly to schedule, and make their landing, seeing ahead of them, the film's finished, doesn't it? Yeah, the detritus, if you like, of those early landings. A mortar bomb came down on the deck and detonated one of the British armoured cars carrying a huge number of mortar rounds, causing that huge fire at the front of the vessel that Mapham captured in his photograph. But that beach armoured recovery vehicle at the very back actually manages to get off, and it's commanded by Major Herbert Yankel. He's the commanding officer of the 20th Beach Recovery Section, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, and he noted in his letter that he thought only a couple of vehicles were actually able to get off this landing craft. He actually drove through some of the burning debris because there was enough space between the burning vehicles, and got his armoured recovery vehicle safely onto the beach. Taken from one of the landing craft as it makes its landing, it was not all that successful for the 41st LCT flotilla, many of them coming in for extensive damage from anti-tank guns and mortars and artillery further inland. In fact, Sub-Lieutenant Charles Flynn, who had only just been added at the last moment to take these tanks ashore, recounted in his brief memoir how he was subjected to heavy mortar fire as he came in, and one mortar bomb landed on the forward port winch house, killing one of the men inside and wounding the other two men of his company, whilst others were hit by shrapnel. His coxswain in the space beneath him, if you visit LCT 7074 and you stand on the bridge, the coxswain stands in this little armoured place beneath, was peppered by shrapnel when an armoured when an anti-tank round hit that conning tower. Fortunately, not killing the coxswain, but severely wounding his coxswain. And Sword Beach is better described, I think, in this photograph taken by James Mappin, showing men as they scramble for shelter as machine guns fire above them. And then on the immediate road inland, this M20 anti-tank gun, which looks like a tank and is a tank essentially, but technically in military parlance is not a tank for reasons that I'm too complicated to go into now, is firing inland as infantry take shelter behind it.